different rules that I shall now put on. One being rule number one, retail investor,
Yeah.
right? Maybe I've my Coinbase account, I'm starting to see some movement in the right direction or whatever. What can or should I do? Should I care at this point? Does it matter to me, like whether Gary Gensler says it's a secure? I mean, what's your advice there, or what tactically should they be thinking about?
I think every retail investor in America needs to be paying attention to this. I really do. Like I said already,
because it'll impact how you invest and your potential returns. Why?
I think the muscle memory that is formed as a result of the way this whole process plays out is eventually going to have spillover effect into other areas.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say there's going to be any direct connection between the decision whether or not Bitcoin is a security or a commodity, or Ethereum or XRP or any of these others are. But the muscle memory that is developed there, I think, is eventually going to have layout. And
mm-hmm.
So to answer one of your earlier questions about what might we expect this year, it's very unlikely / almost zero chance we see any new regulations from the SEC. In 2019, though, we did get some interesting guidance, so-called, of how they would like the crypto developers to interpret and use the existing regulations. I think that there's almost no stretch of the imagination where that guidance is considered sufficient.
Did people take the guidance and use it?
Well, some of it was like, come talk to us and we'll tell you. And instead of the SEC being helpful in instances where people have come to talk to them,
don't ask forgiveness, ask permission.
Yeah, a lot of people have gotten in trouble. And the lesson learned is, if you do go talk to the SEC, you might get a hand slap down the road. So I think there's a decent chance that sometime in the next year, maybe 2 years, there is some more guidance,
mm-hmm.
a little more clarity into how to interpret this.
That sounds like a recipe for people to leave. If clarity is what people want, that is not clarity.
Yeah, I think that there are actual regulatory changes, like we talked a bit about
mm-hmm.
Europe, that are in the process of being implemented, or in elsewhere around the world already implemented, that are legitimate bona fide clarity, and those jurisdictions are going to be on the receiving end of any ambiguity that remains here in the States. But I think the retail investor also needs to be paying attention because of Gensler's work in other regulatory areas. So
mm-hmm.
he's really gotten a lot of attention for his work in crypto, or his lack thereof work in crypto, his enforcement in crypto. But
his
he's also
support for 90-plus-year-old regulations, right?
Yeah, and I think that he, like pretty much every SEC chair in history I can only imagine, wants to make his mark. And making your mark in crypto by enforcing 90-year-old regulations isn't necessarily sort of like the progressive perception
mm-hmm.
that a chair might want to have.
Mm-hmm.
He is doing the exact opposite in pretty much every other area. So when it comes to ESG, he's getting very, very aggressive about requiring that companies that benefit from the American publicly traded system are held to higher standards as far as their reporting around ESG, environmental and sustainable investing opportunities. And the potential added cost of compliance as a result of being deemed an ESG and having to be more transparent with your investors, regulators, could actually be seen as a discourager of ESG investing opportunities
mm-hmm.
by having that extra threshold
mm-hmm.
there. And then on the other side, he's not only aggressively going at changing the way that we deal with ESG, but he's very aggressively going after traditional market infrastructure.
Yeah.
And
it's a complete overhaul, basically.
Yeah. In December, they proposed, I think it was 3 regulatory changes. many of which are a direct result of the so-called meme stock trades that were happening.
Just the GameStop and the Best Buys
exactly.
of the world. Right.
These were stocks that big institutional investors had shorted, and small little retail investors liked them because in the case of GameStop, they like to play video games, and they didn't like that their favorite video game store was going down, and they bought up the price of these stocks, causing huge losses for the institutional investors that had bet against those stocks.
Right.
And it seems pretty likely that new phenomenon of retail investors acting like institutional investors in the way that they were manipulating market prices, creating the impression of a short or a long, was at least one factor in deciding to propose these new regulatory changes.
Right.
Now, I was
former
just talking,
Goldman guy, that being Gary Gensler, does not like retail investors to act in concert like institutional investors. It's hard to
say. I don't want. Yes, that was my first instinct, but I will say I'm talking with a lot of sources out there that say that's actually not the way it's playing out.
Okay.
That the Citadels of the world, the Virtues of the world, a lot of these other organizations that were really harmed by the GameStop, the GameStop meme stock trend, are actually also not very excited about these changes.
Okay.
And I think that what really needs to happen is a more nuanced look at each of the regulations individually. And along those lines, Friday, an unofficial, somewhat official deadline passed for comments for people that wanted to make their opinions heard about these proposed regulatory changes. There's usually a little bit of leeway there, which is to say that anybody who sees this and goes and actually looks into the proposals and reads them, I think that there's still comments being received. So, while we have on the one front an implementation of regulation that is enforcement of 90-year-old regulations
on the crypto front,
and a rather staunch refusal to make any changes, is contrasted heavily with the way that Gensler and the SEC is dealing with other areas. And for those that want to sort of have a say in that, especially retail investors that I think are heavily impacted on the crypto side, and I think triggered the changes on the non-crypto side, should be paying very close attention.